Tuesday, June 7th, 1692. A brass pocket watch in a Port Royal merchant's coat. The hands read 11:43 a.m. In 30 seconds, they will stop forever. On Thames Street, a French Huguenot merchant named Louis Goldie is walking toward the harbour. 50 years old, a pewter cup of rum punch in his hand. The richest port in the English Caribbean stretching out around him. 4 stories of brick. Ships unloading Spanish silver at the quay. The noise of 44 taverns spilling out of every doorway. The ground under his feet is saturated sand. In 30 seconds, the sand will turn to liquid. The earth will open and swallow Louis Goldie whole. Then, minutes later, it will spit him back out alive into the harbour. 2/3 of the city around him will not survive. This is how the wickedest port the English Empire ever built ended in a single morning. And by the time this video is over, you'll know exactly why every Protestant preacher from London to Boston celebrated when God reached down and swallowed it. To understand why Port Royal happened, you have to go back 37 years. May 1655, Oliver Cromwell's Western design, England's strategic plan to break the Spanish monopoly on the Caribbean. Admiral William Penn and General Robert Venables sail from England with a fleet of 30 ships and 7,000 men. The target, Spanish Hispaniola. They fail. 1,000 English die in the assault. Disease takes more. Penn refuses to come home empty-handed. He sails west looking for a softer target. He finds Jamaica, lightly defended, 1,500 Spanish settlers, 1,500 enslaved Africans. On the 10th of May, 1655, the English take the island with minimal resistance. And then they realize what they have signed up for. Jamaica is 10,991 square kilometers of jungle, ringed by Spanish Cuba to the north, Spanish Hispaniola to the east, and the French navigating everywhere in between. The Spanish are guaranteed to come back. London does not have enough Royal Navy warships to defend a Caribbean colony at this distance. The solution is the most cynical bargain in the history of the English Empire. They invite the pirates in. By the early 1660s, the governors of Jamaica are issuing letters of marque, legal commissions to attack Spanish shipping, to any Caribbean buccaneer who will accept English protection in return. The buccaneers become privateers. The Crown gets a defensive fleet at no cost. The pirates get legal status and a deep water home port. Both sides agree to ignore the moral problem. By 1660, Port Royal is no longer a fort. It is a state-sponsored pirate republic. And the spit of sand they chose to build it on was the most strategically perfect and geologically suicidal piece of land in the entire Caribbean. Look at where they chose to build it. The geography of the disaster is itself part of the story. Reach for the map. Find Jamaica. Follow the south coast. You will see a long, thin sand spit reaching 18 kilometers east-southeast from the mainland, almost enclosing the harbor at Kingston. The Spanish called it the Palisados. It is so narrow in places that you can stand on a rooftop and see both the open Caribbean and the inner harbor at the same time. At the far end of the spit sits a quay. 51 acres of sand and limestone, the same square footage as a small city block in modern Manhattan. This is where Port Royal will be built. The harbour behind the spit is what made the decision inevitable. 40 feet deep at low tide, deep enough that the largest Royal Navy warships of the era could dock against the quay. Ships came right alongside, no lighter boats, no anchorage offshore. A captain who had just sacked a Spanish silver fleet could be unloading the loot onto Thames Street within 2 hours of dropping anchor. No other English Caribbean port matched it. In 1656, the English raised the walls of Fort Charles, named for the Stuart king they had not yet restored. 26 cannons facing the harbour mouth. The first wooden warehouses went up around it. Then the taverns, then the brothels. Then, by the 1670s, brick houses, the bricks shipped from England as ballast in the holds of trading vessels, layered onto a foundation of unconsolidated water-saturated sand. Below the brick, sand. Below the sand, more sand. No bedrock for another 15 meters down. They built faster than they could think. And the man whose stolen silver paid for most of it was already on his way through the gates. His name was Henry Morgan. Born around 1635 in the village of Llanrymni, Wales. Not English, Welsh. He arrived in Jamaica as part of the 1655 invasion force and stayed. By the 1660s, he was the most successful buccaneer the English crown had on its books. In 1668, Morgan sailed against Portobello, the second richest Spanish port in the Caribbean. He took it with 470 men. He held it for 31 days. He ransomed it for 100,000 pesos. Each man in his crew went home with £60, 2 to 3 times what a Jamaican plantation worker earned in a year. In 1669, he was trapped in the lagoon at Maracaibo by a Spanish naval blockade. He set fireship decoys, escaped intact, and brought the loot home anyway. In January 1671, he crossed the Isthmus of Panama with 1,200 men and destroyed Panama City, the wealthiest Spanish settlement in the Pacific. The loot, by Esquemeling's count, filled 175 pack mules. Silver, gold, jewels, and slaves. Here is the number that explains everything. A single Morgan raid produced about £75,000 in plunder. That same year, the entire legitimate sugar economy of British Jamaica was worth about £10,000. Piracy was earning the colony 7 times more than its lawful trade. And the cynical twist, England and Spain had signed the Treaty of Madrid in July of 1670. 6 months before Morgan torched Panama. Morgan was technically a war criminal. He was arrested, shipped to London, put on trial. He was acquitted. Knighted by Charles II in 1674 and sent back to Jamaica as lieutenant governor. The privateer who sacked Panama was now the man running the colony that hosted the pirates. The wealth came faster than any city in the English-speaking world had ever seen. In 1670, the first census of Port Royal counted 2,181 inhabitants. By 1692, the population was approximately 6,500, tripled in 20 years. Now do the arithmetic. 6,500 people, 51 acres, 127 people per acre, denser than 17th century London, denser than Amsterdam. To fit them, Port Royal built upward. Approximately 2,000 buildings by 1692. Many of them brick houses 4 stories high, leaning slightly because they sat on shifting sand. Streets so narrow that residents on opposite sides could shake hands or pass goods from window to window without raising their voices. This was not a sleepy wooden pirate village. This was a miniature Amsterdam built on a sandbar. Packed, vertical, painted, with leaded glass windows shipped in from Bristol. The money was the engine. Contemporary observers wrote that Port Royal merchants spent more in a single night than a London merchant spent in a year. The per capita silver flow ran 2 to 3 times higher than London's in the 1680s. What did it look like on the body? In 32-degree Caribbean heat, men walked Thames Street in silk doublets, velvet breeches, lace cuffs, gold rings, ivory-handled rapiers, status clothing wildly impractical for the climate, purchased deliberately to advertise prize money. The Beckfords were one example among hundreds. A family of Port Royal merchants who funded slaving voyages, lent money to plantation owners, and laundered Spanish silver into respectable trade. Within 50 years, their descendants would be members of Parliament. One of them, William Beckford, became Lord Mayor of London in 1762. The wealth was real. The question was where most of it ended up by midnight. Stop the video for a moment. You've just been paid your share of a Spanish prize ship. 12 months' wages in coin in your pocket. The Thames Street taverns are waiting. The sign of Bacchus, the cat and fiddle, the 3 mariners. Drop a comment. How long do you think you'd keep that money? A week? A single night? Tell me. Port Royal, in 1680, at least 44 licensed taverns, punch houses and grog shops in a town of 51 acres. Roughly 1 in 4 buildings was a tavern, a gambling house, or a brothel. Do the math another way. Approximately 1 drinking establishment for every 10 residents. Per capita drinking rates 3 to 4 times those of mainland England. The buildings doubled. Drinking downstairs, prostitutes upstairs, gambling tables in the back. Many never closed. The drink was rum, made from Jamaican sugarcane molasses. Drunk in punch, rum, lime, sugar, water, or undiluted as Kill Devil, which did exactly what its name promised. Listen to Edward Ward, writing in 1698. The dunghill of the universe, the receptacle of vagabonds, the sanctuary of bankrupts, and the close stool for the purges of our prisons. As sickly as a hospital, as dangerous as the plague, as hot as hell, and as wicked as the devil. The madams were named. Mary Carleton, known as the German Princess, a transported English convict who turned Port Royal madam, returned to England and was hanged at Tyburn in 1673. The cost of the trade, documented average lifespan for prostitutes, was 5 to 7 years post-entry. Disease, violence, no medical care. The Port Royal slang for the prostitute and pickpocket teams who worked the taverns was buttock and twang. Get a sailor drunk, take him upstairs, steal what's left while he sleeps, and when the money was gone, there was another street he couldn't avoid. That street ended at a small headland on the seaward side of the city. It was called Gallows Point. From the 1670s onward, Gallows Point was the public execution ground for every condemned pirate the Jamaican Admiralty Court could catch. The method was short drop hanging, death by slow strangulation, 15 to 30 minutes of struggle in front of a crowd. After the body stopped moving, it was cut down, dipped in tar, and hung in an iron gibbet cage at the low water mark. Crows landed on the corpse for weeks. The skeleton remained until the bones fell apart. The location was deliberate. It was the first thing a pirate captain saw sailing into Port Royal, the gibbeted body of another pirate captain swinging at the harbour mouth. Message delivered. The most famous occupant of that cage was a man called Calico Jack. His real name was John Rackham. He was hanged at Gallows Point on the 18th of November, 1720. His body was left in the iron at the entrance to the harbour for months. His crewmates were two women, Anne Bonney and Mary Read. Both were tried in the same Kingston courtroom. Both were convicted of piracy and sentenced to hang. And then, at sentencing, they did something the court had not seen before. They asked to be examined. The exact words recorded in the Jamaica Admiralty transcript, "My lord, we plead our bellies." Both were pregnant. Both were spared the rope. Both vanished from the historical record within 5 years. The same colony that armed Henry Morgan in the 1660s was hanging his successors at the harbour mouth by the 1720s. The same governors, both kinds of paper, but the bodies at Gallows Point were not the worst cargo Port Royal handled. The cargo that mattered most to Port Royal's wealth was not silver, it was people. In 1672, Charles II's brother James, Duke of York, founded the Royal African Company. The company held the English Crown's monopoly on the African slave trade. Port Royal became its central Caribbean entrepot. Slave ships sailed from the West African coast and unloaded at the Thames Street wharves. The enslaved were sold in open-air auctions yards from where the pirate loot was unloaded, then resold across the English Caribbean, to Barbados, to Antigua, to the mainland colonies of Virginia and the Carolinas. The numbers are documented. Between 1672 and 1689, the Royal African Company shipped approximately 90 to 100,000 enslaved Africans through Port Royal, the largest single concentration of the English slave trade anywhere in the 17th century. On arrival, the enslaved were branded with a heated iron. The mark was the Royal African Company monogram, D.Y., Duke of York, the future King James II of England. The death rate on the voyage itself, the middle passage from Africa to the Caribbean, ran between 15 and 25% per ship. And the merchants who handled the slave consignments were the same merchants who handled the pirate loot. The same names, the same wharves, the same paper. Sugar contracts, letters of credit, slave inventories, insurance on voyages, every form of paper wealth in the English Atlantic ran through the same hands. The disease came with the ships. Yellow fever, endemic to West Africa, reached Port Royal in the 1640s and never left. By the 1680s, the mortality rate among new English arrivals to the colony ran 30 to 50% in the first year. The English nickname for the West Indies in this period was the White Man's Grave. And then, on a Tuesday morning in June, the ground itself opened. Tuesday, the 7th of June, 1692. Hot. The merchants at Thames Street are taking their morning rum punch. The HMS Swan and HMS Mordaunt are anchored at the quay. At 11:43, the first shock arrives. A low rumble. The leaded windows shake. Pewter tankards rattle on the tables. The bell of the Anglican church begins to ring without anyone touching the rope. 30 seconds later, the second shock. Stronger. Brick chimneys collapse. People run into the streets. Then the third shock. 30 to 40 seconds of sustained shaking, and the ground begins to move like water. The mechanism has a modern name: liquefaction. The water-saturated sand loses cohesion. Brick buildings 4 stories high sink as if into quicksand. On Thames Street, Lewis Goldie is swallowed whole, buried alive in liquefying sand. The aftershock ejects him to the surface, into the harbour, where he swims to a boat and survives. He will live another 47 years. A 2-meter tsunami sweeps across the remaining land. The HMS Swan is torn from its mooring and thrown over the rooftops, deposited inland to serve as a rescue platform for the rest of the day. Within 10 minutes, 2,000 people are dead. 2/3 of the city has slid into the harbor. Anglican minister Emmanuel Heath flees his cracking church. His letter dated 22 June 1692 reaches London weeks later. The single sentence quoted in every history of the disaster: "I saw the earth open and swallow a multitude of people, and the sea mounting in upon us over the fortification." Within hours, boats arrive from the mainland. The looters strip the floating dead. Heath records, "They cut off the fingers of the dead and stripped them of all that they had on. Some bodies were buried with heads still above ground. The dogs ate the heads." Every Protestant preacher in the English-speaking world received the news as proof of one thing. The 17th century called the verdict immediately. John Flavel, English Presbyterian preacher, sermon of 1693. What was Port Royal? A second Sodom, sunk in a single morning. Cotton Mather, in Boston, preached the same. The wickedest port the English Empire ever built had been swallowed by the sea on a Tuesday morning under a clear sky. To the 17th century, this was not metaphor. This was God's signature. The political effect was quiet relief. Within 2 years, the new Lieutenant Governor, Sir William Beeston, was hunting pirates rather than commissioning them. The golden age of piracy moved on. Tortuga, Nassau, Charleston. By 1730, it was effectively over. Port Royal slept under the sea for 267 years. In 1959, the American underwater archaeologist Robert Marx began the first systematic excavation, with the Jamaican government's blessing. The first object he recovered was a brass pocket watch. The hands had stopped at 1143. Between 1981 and 2000, Texas A&M's Nautical Archaeology program excavated tens of thousands of items in situ. Taverns with the cups still on the tables, kitchens with food still in the pots, warehouses with cargo still in the barrels. The most thoroughly excavated 17th century English colonial site in the world. Today, a small fishing village of 2,000 people sits on the surviving third of the original town. Fort Charles still mounts its cannons. The Royal Anglican St. Peter's Church still stands. Inside the church, on the wall, is a tombstone. Louis Goldie, born France, died Port Royal, the 22nd of December, 1739. Age 99, the inscription describes the day the earth swallowed him whole and the sea spat him back out alive. If you want more reconstructions of the cities buried under the next centuries, the room's history skipped, subscribe to Chronic Rebuilt. The next one is already on screen.